What about the fact that he's going out and he's saying, "I am a socialist, Sarah. Yes, I'm a democratic socialist. I'm a socialist running for New York City." That word, the Republicans were able to use that to great advantage during the last election cycle. I mean, they made it into a slur. He's clearly trying to make it into a positive. He's trying to own it and to push back on that. How's that going to work nationally?
Yeah, I mean, this is where, look, Donald Trump loves a foil. And like the Republicans want nothing more than to have a socialist mayor of New York City that they can hold up as sort of an example of the way that the left wants to run, right?
Oh, these fucking rat fuckers, dude. What the fuck? What the actual fuck? Like, what the fuck? Oh, it's so infuriating. Like, yeah, I'm not surprised by it. And we should all prepare ourselves for what is going to be just this on repeat forever, really. But definitely from now until New York's general election. But the idea that, like, the last election was unique in that Trump specifically used socialism as some sort of a cudgel against the Democrats and Kamala Harris is such a cherry picked and short version of American political history that it really is breathtaking. The Republicans have been using socialism as a boogeyman for decades, decades. And it doesn't matter if it's Clinton, it doesn't matter if it's Obama, it doesn't matter if it's Kamala Harris, it doesn't matter if it's Hillary Clinton, it doesn't matter if it's Jimmy Carter, all the way back to FDR and Social Security. They have been using socialism as a boogeyman. And Trump is no different. Right? He just does it loudly and more brazenly with no regard at all for what the individual politics of the person that they're talking about is, which actually makes this an even more ridiculous take from these anchors, because Trump will call whoever it is a socialist. He called Joe Biden a socialist, doesn't matter. No, does not matter who they are. If fucking Ronald Reagan was running as a Democrat, they would call him a socialist. Okay, it doesn't matter what your politics are and what your policies are, they will call you a socialist. And all of this whole discussion ignores really what's the fundamental question, right? Because they're talking about politics and they're talking about the stuff that the Democratic Party fails with every time, which is messaging, and focusing on messaging over the message, and the message being centered on the policies, right? And it's such a catastrophic failure, and it's mind blowing, because if Mamdani manages to win this election and as a democratic socialist, which is different than a socialist, just to be clear, and runs New York, the question should be whether or not his policies are successful, not whether or not they are socialist. Like, the label does not matter. What matters is the effect. You know what I mean? Like, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir somewhat here with my audience, but it really blows my mind. And something that I just constantly thinking about is the highly online liberal and democratic voter, who from the 2024 election took away the message that the left can't be trusted, and which is patently not rooted in fact at all. They're highly online, so they see a lot of messaging from people on the left who were critical of Kamala Harris, and we're talking about Gaza, and we're saying they weren't going to vote for Kamala Harris. But easily the most reliable demographic group, there are two for Democrats. One is Black women, and the other is white, very liberal voters. And you have to understand that when they do these polls, they ask, they don't give you an option for leftist, right? So if someone asked me, like, are you very conservative, liberal, or very liberal? and those are the only options you get, I'm going to say very liberal, right? Even though I would not identify myself as a liberal willingly. Okay, so I just want to put that out there. But very liberal white voters, one of the most consistent demographic groups to vote for Democrats, as well as Black women. And obviously that's not an apples to apples comparison, because you're talking about race and gender versus race and ideology. But we think of the Democratic Party in terms, and very often about Black women as a reliable constituency, as we should, because they are a very reliable constituency, even though in the 2024 election, they voted for Kamala Harris less than they voted for Joe Biden, less than they voted for Hillary Clinton, and less than they voted for Barack Obama. So you could look at the numbers and say, and the trend, and say Black women actually voted for Kamala Harris significantly less than they voted for any Democrat in the last 20 years. What's the message that Black women voters were trying to send? I wouldn't take that. I wouldn't do that. I'm just saying that, like, you kind of get this idea that it's like, Black women were right and white voters were wrong. White voters writ large went for Donald Trump, but very liberal white voters overwhelmingly, and at about the same numbers, voted for Kamala Harris same numbers as Black women. So those are like your two most reliable constituencies. And white liberals voted for Kamala Harris at the same rate as they voted for Joe Biden in 2020. So there really was no decrease between the percentage of voters who voted for Kamala Harris as who voted for Joe Biden. So this discourse that people on the left cost the Democrats this election, there's many different ways to disprove it, but it is wrong. And so I think about this a lot, because those voters and those people just in general are, all over TikTok, all over the internet, just stuck on this idea that the left cost them this election. And it's wrong. And now they have spent and now are going to spend the next few months here just hammering on Mamdani, and in the course of doing that, probably supporting some really awful candidates, right? Like, if Andrew Cuomo ends up running as an independent, probably some of them will support him. If Eric Adams is running as an independent, some of them will probably support him. And they'll go on and on about how unreliable the left is, how much Mamdani's policies are, they're too idealistic, and, they're just going to be giving fodder to the Republicans, and blah, 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 blah. This whole argument that you see in this thing from MSNBC. And all of that in the face of seeing that a candidate promising actual left-wing politics to left-wing voters can win an election. Like, that is the main takeaway from all of this. And Democrats have consistently refused to try that. They've gotten in the way of that time and time again. And it's not just the Democratic Party, because I think sometimes we get kind of stuck on what the Democratic Party does. Absolutely reasonable. Democratic voters are responsible for this too. Democratic voters are responsible for Donald Trump almost at the same level as the Democratic Party is responsible for Donald Trump. And people who consistently refuse to have vision, refuse to engage with progressive to left-wing politics, and who push these milquetoast candidates who stand no chance of winning, or who at most will win on the margins, like Joe Biden did. It's really wild. And we're getting ready to watch it happen just all over again here with this election. And I just wish that these people would just accept that it's not that the policies aren't realistic, it's that they are just conservatives. They don't want those policies. They want to continue to benefit from the corporatist, status quo, centrist at best Democratic party line. That's what they like. And so this argument that it's like, oh, you're giving away too much to the Republicans. The Republicans are going to use this against us. We're going to lose because of this messaging. It's bullshit. It's all bullshit. The reality is these people don't want those politics because they benefit or perceive themselves to benefit from what the Democratic Party currently advocates for, which is center-right economic policy and centrist social, social issue policy, to put it that way. And it's just so maddening to watch, the conversation about what these, and I guess one more thing, which is that you see this throughout American media, and throughout just like our political discourse, not just the media. We all, as a people are guilty of this. And I try to get that in my head, because there's a level of personal responsibility that I think all of us need to take. The media is reflective of all of us, you know what I mean? And all of us have the tools at our disposal and the information at our disposal to be more educated than the propaganda that we are fed gives us credit for. But we get the media that we want. And if you don't do the things necessary to educate yourself on the left and the right, then you don't really deserve any better media than what you're getting. You're getting what gets ratings, and you're getting what you ask for, essentially. But what I was going to say is that like we have this issue where we talk about the politics of these things so much more than the policy, and we talk about the traditions, we talk about the minutia and the wonky details of things like Supreme Court decisions, instead of just engaging in the conversation about what the policy is and what the outcome is, and do the American people support that? You know what I mean? Like, the conversations around this Iran thing have been so much about what's the political impact going to be on the Republican Party, on the Democratic Party, on Donald Trump. Not really like a full-throated and like detailed engagement with, do the American people want this? And that comes from the politicians, but it also comes from the media, and then it also comes from us, and there's a lot of people responsible here. And that's why I say that we need to I respect and engage in the criticism of the Democratic Party, but at some point we have to look at the Democratic voter, because, there are primaries, and, we see a good example of a primary going well with New York yesterday. But there are plenty of times where the Democratic Party uses the system and exploits the system and the voter to get the outcome that it wants. And the voters need to stop helping them do that, right? The voter needs to stop being a pawn in that game that the Democratic establishment is playing. You can't win by just exploiting the system, and is what I'm saying. They put so much weight on primaries in southern states where there are lots of black voters, but southern states that will never vote for a Democrat, regardless of how centrist they are, regardless of whether or not they're a Republican, right? Yet the states that do vote for Democrats, and where so many Democrats live, are underrepresented in the primary process. Political parties used to be associations of people who had shared beliefs, and they would associate and try to achieve outcomes through politics. The American system is so perverse with these two parties that instead it's parties that American people have to jam themselves into, right? It's parties in search of voters instead of voters in search of each other to achieve outcomes. And it leads to really fucked up shit like this. And I hate it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so focused on the party system, and why I will say things like the Republicans and the Democrats are two sides of the same coin. It's not because their policies are so similar. It's because they both work together to achieve the same outcome, which is the disenfranchisement of the American people and the retrenchment of the status quo. MSNBC, go fuck yourself.